The morning my daughter betrayed me began in a bookstore cafe in Seattle. It was raining lightly, the kind of steady gray drizzle that makes the windows look blurred and the air smell like wet pavement and roasted beans. I was sitting near the back, beside a tall shelf labeled Pacific Northwest History, stirring cinnamon into my tea. I had just turned 66 a month earlier. My life had become quiet in a way I once thought I wanted. Predictable mornings, afternoon walks along Lake Union, volunteer shifts at the public archive twice a week. When my phone vibrated across the wooden table, I glanced down and smiled. Claire. My only child. She rarely called before noon. For a split second, I allowed myself to feel pleased. Maybe she was thinking of me. Maybe she wanted advice or simply to hear my voice. I answered with warmth already in my tone. Good morning, sweetheart. She did not return the greeting. Her voice was bright, almost breathless. Mom, I'm flying to Italy tonight. We're getting married on Friday. I blinked at the rain streaking down the glass. Married? Yes. It's perfect timing. Adrian's investors want us based in Milan, and we decided not to drag things out. There was a pause just long enough to make my stomach tighten. I needed to tell you before you hear from the bank, she continued quickly. The cafe noise faded to a low hum. What about the bank? I asked carefully. I consolidated your accounts, she said. And I sold the downtown condo. It didn't make sense for you to keep managing everything alone. You'll be better off this way. My tea went untouched. I watched steam curl upward as though it belonged to someone else's table. You sold my condo? It's fine, she said lightly. You still have your pension. And honestly, Mom, you don't need that much. Adrian and I need capital to scale his company. It's temporary. Temporary. I had spent 40 years as a compliance officer for a regional credit union. I understood what that word could hide. You had no right, I said quietly. I had access, she corrected. You signed the authorization last winter. You said you trusted me. The call ended before I could respond. She hung up with the efficiency of someone checking an item off a list. I remained seated long after the barista called my name to ask if I wanted a refill. I did not cry. I did not shout. I felt something colder than anger spreading through me. Clarity. Claire had not acted impulsively. She had been positioning herself for months. After my husband, Thomas Hale, died 12 years ago from pancreatic cancer, I reorganized my life with careful discipline. Grief had taught me that stability is fragile. I diversified assets, moved property into protective structures, documented every signature. Claire knew I was thorough. She used to tease me for it. Mom keeps receipts for receipts, she would laugh. But she also watched. Over the past year, her questions had become pointed. How liquid are your investments? Do you still manage everything yourself? Wouldn't it be safer if I had digital access? She framed it as concern. I framed it as love. I drove home from the cafe slowly, windshield wipers marking time. The house I lived in, a modest craftsman in Ballard, was not the condo she had mentioned. The downtown unit had been a rental property for nearly a decade. She believed it was my primary residence because I had never corrected her assumption. That omission had not been accidental. Inside my office, I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts. The balances confirmed what she had said. My primary savings account, once holding just over $300,000 from insurance settlements and decades of disciplined investing, had been reduced to barely $1,200. Transfers had been executed gradually over 3 months, always below reporting thresholds that might trigger alerts. Professional. Calculated. I contacted the bank's internal fraud division, careful not to disclose my relationship to the suspect yet. The representative read out each transfer date. They aligned precisely with weekends Claire had visited. My pulse remained steady. That surprised me. The condo sale closed that morning, she had said. I retrieved the property file from my cabinet. The deed for that condo was not in my personal name. It had been transferred into a revocable trust 2 years earlier, a trust where I was sole trustee and beneficiary. Claire's name appeared nowhere, which meant if she had sold it, she had misrepresented her authority. I almost laughed, not from humor, but from astonishment at her arrogance. She assumed access equaled ownership. She assumed proximity equaled entitlement. Later that afternoon, she called again. This time her tone was less excited, more controlled. "Mom, the title company is asking unnecessary questions," she said. "You need to confirm that I had authority." "Which property did you sell?" I asked calmly. "The Pine Street condo." "And did you inform the buyer it's held in trust?" Silence. "That's irrelevant," she replied finally. "It is entirely relevant," I said. "You cannot sell what you do not legally control." Her voice sharpened. "Don't start with technicalities. Adrian's investors are already wiring funds based on this." There it was. Pressure. Urgency. Blame. I ended the call without raising my voice. Then I opened a second folder, one Claire did not know existed. My primary residence had been transferred years ago into an irrevocable asset protection trust structured under Washington state law. Not even I could liquidate it without procedural safeguards. Claire believed she had secured my future for herself. In reality, she had exposed her own vulnerability. That evening, I reviewed an old memory that refused to fade. Last winter, when I had been hospitalized briefly for cardiac monitoring, Claire brought paperwork. She said it was insurance documentation. I remembered feeling tired, medicated, eager to return home. I signed where she indicated. I now suspected those pages had not been insurance forms. At midnight, I located a scanned copy in my email. Power of attorney. Broad. Sweeping. Effective immediately. Notarized. Except the notary stamp looked wrong. Slightly blurred, as if added digitally. My hands trembled for the first time that day. Not with fear, with recognition. Claire had not simply consolidated accounts. She had engineered authority. The next morning, I contacted an attorney I once collaborated with on regulatory audits. His name was Victor Lang. Cautious, meticulous, incapable of being intimidated. By noon, I was seated across from him in a quiet office overlooking Elliott Bay. He reviewed the document slowly. "The notary commission expired months before this date," he said finally. "And this template hasn't been valid in Washington for years." I felt the last fragment of denial dissolve. "So it's fraudulent." "It appears so," he replied evenly. "And if it was signed while you were medicated without informed consent, that compounds the issue." My phone vibrated again. A message from Claire. "Why are you making this complicated? Just confirm everything was authorized. We're building something big here. Don't sabotage me." Sabotage. In her mind, my refusal to surrender was aggression. I looked out at the gray water of the bay and understood something painful. She did not believe she was stealing. She believed she was reallocating resources that would eventually belong to her anyway. Victor asked me a simple question. Do you want to resolve this quietly, or do you want to protect yourself fully? I thought about every night I had stayed up balancing budgets after Thomas died. Every overtime shift. Every investment decision made cautiously, patiently. Not for luxury, but for independence. "I want the law involved," I said. That choice marked the end of the illusion that blood guarantees loyalty. By the time I returned home, I felt something unfamiliar yet steady rising within me. Not rage. Not revenge. Precision. Claire thought she had secured her future in one bold move. She did not realize she had triggered a system I understood intimately: documentation, verification, consequences. The rain had stopped by evening. The air smelled clean. I stood in my kitchen, looking around the home she believed she had leveraged for herself, and I knew with certainty that this was only the beginning. I picked up my phone and typed a single message. From this point forward, all communication goes through my attorney. I pressed send. For the first time since the bookstore cafe, I felt completely awake. The first formal notice arrived 5 days later. It was not dramatic, not loud, not cinematic. It came as a registered envelope placed carefully into my mailbox, stamped with the insignia of King County. I stood in my kitchen holding it for nearly a full minute before opening it. My hands were steady now. The trembling from earlier in the week had settled into something colder and more useful: focus. Inside was confirmation that the sale of the Pine Street condo had been flagged. The buyer's legal team had discovered discrepancies in the ownership chain. The trust documentation I had filed 2 years earlier did not align with the authority Claire claimed to possess. Escrow funds were frozen. Title transfer suspended. Claire called less than an hour after that notice was delivered. Her voice had changed again. The brightness was gone. What replaced it was strain. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I corrected the record," I replied calmly. "You're humiliating me," she snapped. "Adrian's partners think I misrepresented everything." "Did you?" I asked. Silence. I could hear traffic on her end, maybe the airport drop-off lane. Then she lowered her voice. "Mom, you signed the power of attorney. You gave me authority." I signed paperwork while medicated, believing it was insurance documentation, I said evenly. The notary was invalid. The template obsolete. That is not authority. That is deception. Her breathing sharpened. "You're twisting this." "No," I said quietly. "I'm documenting it." That word seemed to strike her harder than any accusation. She hung up. I did not call back. Instead, I drove downtown to Victor Lang's office. We spent 3 hours assembling a chronological file. Every transfer date, every visit Claire made, every email, every hospital record from the week the document was signed. I remembered flashes from that hospital stay more clearly now. The dim lighting, the foredrip, the way Claire hovered beside my bed with a pen already uncapped. "Just initial here," she had said gently. "It's procedural." Procedural. Victor requested certified copies of the notary commission records. Expired. He arranged for a handwriting analyst to compare my known signatures with the power of attorney. Preliminary observation: inconsistent pressure, uneven baseline, signs of hesitation inconsistent with my documented writing patterns over decades. This was no longer emotional. It was forensic. 2 days later, Claire appeared at my front door unannounced. It was late afternoon. The sky over Seattle was unusually clear, Mount Rainier faintly visible in the distance, like a quiet witness. When I opened the door, she stepped forward immediately, as if momentum alone might override boundaries. Adrian stood behind her. Tall, polished, expensive coat, calculating eyes. He did not greet me. "We need to talk," Claire said. "I prefer written communication," I answered. Adrian's jaw tightened. "This is a misunderstanding that can be resolved privately." "Forgery is not a misunderstanding," I replied. Claire flinched at the word. "You're overreacting," she insisted. "Families handle things internally." "Families also respect consent," I said. She pushed past me into the living room without waiting for permission. Adrian followed. They sat as though staging an intervention. "Mom," Claire began, softer now, almost pleading, "we didn't steal from you. We accelerated what would eventually happen. It's inheritance planning." I studied her face. I searched for remorse. I saw frustration instead. "You transferred over $300,000 without disclosure," I said. "You attempted to liquidate trust-held property without authority. That is not acceleration. That is extraction." Adrian leaned forward. "You're 66. Markets fluctuate. Cognitive decline is real. Claire was protecting you from potential mismanagement. There it was. The pivot from justification to implication. I worked in financial compliance for 4 decades, I replied. My cognitive assessments are current and documented. Would you like copies? Claire shot him a warning glance, but the damage was done. You're threatening to destroy my life, she said, voice trembling now.
No, y ensured.
Your decisions are doing that. She stood abruptly. If you proceed legally, this will go public. Do you really want headlines about family fraud? About your own daughter? The attempted shame. I walked to the hallway cabinet and retrieved a thin folder. Inside were printed bank statements with highlighted transfers. I want accuracy, I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Adrian stood as well. If this escalates, we will pursue medical review. We can petition for evaluation. Temporary guardianship. The room went very still.
Claire did not object.
I felt something inside me solidify permanently. You may try, I said evenly, but you will need evidence. And evidence leaves trails. They left without another word. That evening, Victor filed a formal fraud complaint with the county prosecutor's office. Simultaneously, he submitted a civil action to invalidate the fraudulent power of attorney and freeze all related transactions. Within 48 hours, Claire's access to my accounts was suspended pending investigation. Adrian's business entity, which had received a portion of transferred funds, was notified of potential asset seizure pending outcome.
Claire called repeatedly.
I did not answer. Instead, I listened to voicemails. You're being manipulated by that lawyer. You're embarrassing yourself. You're ruining my marriage before it even begins. Each message revealed more urgency, less control. Then came the final one late at night. Please call me, she whispered. This is spiraling. Yes, I thought.
It is.
The formal investigation began quietly. Detectives requested interviews. Bank officials provided logs showing IP addresses linked to Claire's apartment. Digital timestamps showed transfers executed at 2:13 a.m., 1:47 a.m., 3:02 a.m., deliberate hours chosen to avoid immediate detection. The handwriting analyst delivered a preliminary report, high probability of assisted or simulated signature under impairment. The notary whose stamp appeared on the document was located. She had retired months before the alleged signing date. Her seal had been reported missing. Piece by piece, the illusion collapsed. Claire attempted one final strategy. Through her attorney, she proposed settlement. Return of partial funds in exchange for withdrawal of criminal referral. Victor presented the offer to me without commentary. I read it once. No, I said simply. This will likely proceed to indictment, he warned. I understand. What I mourned then was not the money. It was the realization that Claire's instinct was still negotiation, not accountability. 2 weeks later, a grand jury reviewed the evidence. Charges were filed: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, forgery, unlawful transfer of assets. The phrase vulnerable adult struck me hardest. Not because I felt vulnerable, but because she had categorized me as such in her planning. The arrest warrant was executed quietly at her apartment. I was not present. I learned about it through Victor's call that evening. It's done, he said. I stood by my living room window watching twilight settle over the neighborhood. Children rode bicycles past my house. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Life continued, indifferent. Claire called from a restricted number hours later. Her voice was stripped of arrogance now. Mom, they arrested me. I closed my eyes briefly. I know, I said. I didn't think it would go this far. I did, I replied. There was a long silence between us. I thought you'd protect me, she whispered. The words pierced deeper than any accusation. I protected you your entire life, I said gently. This time, I protected myself. She began to cry. Real tears, not strategic ones. For a moment, instinct almost pulled me toward comfort. But comfort without consequence would only repeat the cycle. I love you, I told her quietly. But love is not immunity. The line went silent. After that call, I sat alone in my kitchen, the same place where this storm had begun. I expected to feel victorious. I did not. I felt steady. Justice was no longer abstract. It was moving. Outside, Seattle's skyline glowed against the dark water. The city did not know my story. It did not need to. Systems were functioning exactly as designed. Claire believed she could control the narrative through access, urgency, and guilt. She underestimated documentation. And documentation, once activated, does not bend for emotion. I turned off the lights and prepared for the next stage. The investigation was complete. The trial would come next. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Not physically smaller. The ceilings were high, the walls paneled in polished wood, the state seal mounted behind the judge's bench, but smaller in atmosphere. Condensed. Pressurized. As if every breath taken inside that room carried consequence. I sat beside Victor at the prosecution table, hands folded neatly over a leather folder containing copies of documents I had once signed without hesitation. Across the aisle, Claire sat with her attorney. Adrian was there too, though positioned one row behind her, no longer shoulder to shoulder. That distance spoke louder than any testimony. She did not look at me when proceedings began. The prosecutor opened with facts, not emotion. A timeline appeared on a screen, each transfer from my accounts plotted with precision.
Dates. Amounts.
IP addresses. The slow draining of savings I had built over decades. It was unsettling to see my life reduced to bullet points. $312,000 transferred over 12 weeks. Structured to avoid internal banking alerts. Initiated from a device registered to Claire's residence. The assistant district attorney's voice was steady. This was not a single impulsive withdrawal, she said. It was calculated financial extraction. Claire's attorney objected to the phrasing. Overruled. Then came the power of attorney. The document was projected large enough for the jury to study every line. My name. My address. My supposed signature. I had signed my name tens of thousands of times in my career, loan authorizations, compliance reviews, affidavits. I knew the rhythm of my handwriting the way a musician knows a scale. The expert witness testified next. He explained pressure analysis, stroke sequencing, baseline consistency. He showed exemplars of my authentic signatures spanning 15 years. The differences were subtle but undeniable. Hesitation where there should have been flow, tremor where there should have been firmness. In my professional opinion, he concluded, this signature was either simulated or obtained while the signer was cognitively impaired. Cognitively impaired. I felt Claire shift in her seat. Next came hospital records, admission dates, medication logs, notes documenting that I had been prescribed sedatives during the exact window the document was dated. The notary investigator testified after that. The commission had expired months before the alleged notarization. The seal number did not match active registry records.
Forgery.
The word hung heavily in the room. Claire's defense pivoted quickly. They reframed the narrative. A daughter helping an aging mother manage assets. Miscommunication. Overreaction. Family conflict inflated by outside counsel. When Claire took the stand, the room tightened. She looked smaller than I remembered, less polished. The confidence she carried in my living room weeks earlier had dissolved under fluorescent lights. I never intended harm, she began. My mother is strong, but she struggles with technology. I was protecting her. Did you inform her in writing of the transfers? The prosecutor asked. No, but... Did you obtain independent legal confirmation of authority under the trust? I believed the power of attorney, which was signed during her hospitalization while sedated. Claire hesitated, just long enough. She signed it willingly, she insisted. Why was the notary license expired? The prosecutor asked. I didn't check that. Why were the transfers structured below reporting thresholds? Silence. Her attorney objected again. The judge allowed the question. Claire swallowed. That wasn't intentional. The prosecutor displayed transaction logs indicating manual adjustments to keep transfers under specific amounts. Silence again. It is astonishing how loud silence becomes in a courtroom. Adrian was called next. He testified that he believed Claire had full authority, that the funds were invested into a startup expansion, that he relied on her representations. Did you verify ownership of the Pine Street property? The prosecutor asked. I trusted my fiancé. Did you review the trust documents?
No. Trust.
The word echoed with bitter irony. When it was my turn to testify, I stood carefully and walked to the witness chair. I had imagined this moment many times over the previous weeks, but the reality felt strangely calm. I swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor began gently. Can you describe your professional background? 40 years in financial compliance and regulatory oversight, I replied. Were you cognitively impaired at the time of the alleged signing?
No.
Were you medicated?
Yes.
Sedatives during cardiac monitoring. Did you understand you were granting broad financial authority?
No.
I was told the documents were insurance forms. My voice did not shake. Did you authorize the transfer of over $300,000?
No.
Did you authorize the sale of the Pine Street condo?
No.
Did you at any time intend to relinquish control of your trust assets? Absolutely not. Claire stared at the table during my testimony. When her attorney cross-examined, the tone shifted. Isn't it true you were concerned about aging alone? Yes. Isn't it true you discussed estate planning with your daughter? Yes. Isn't it possible you misunderstood the extent of the documents you signed?
No.
The attorney paused, then tried another angle. You've always been meticulous, correct? Yes. So, isn't it unusual that you would sign something without reading carefully? I met his gaze steadily. It is unusual, I said, which is precisely why I know something was misrepresented. That answer seemed to settle something in the room. Closing arguments followed. The prosecution emphasized pattern, incremental transfers, invalid notarization, exploitation during hospitalization, misrepresentation of trust-held property. The defense emphasized family dynamics, generational misunderstanding, no prior criminal record. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. Not because I feared the outcome, the evidence was clear, but because I understood the finality attached to it. If found guilty, Claire would carry a permanent financial crime record. Her career in corporate development would likely end. Adrian's venture funding would evaporate. Her reputation would fracture beyond repair. If found not guilty, the message would be equally permanent. That deception wrapped in family language carries no consequence. When the jury returned, the courtroom air felt electric. The foreperson stood. On the count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, guilty. On the count of forgery, guilty. On the count of unlawful transfer of assets, guilty. The word landed with weight. Claire's breath left her in a sharp exhale. Adrian stared forward, expression blank. I felt no surge of triumph, only a heavy settling, like a ledger finally balanced. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing.
Claire turned toward me then.
For the first time since this began, there was no argument in her eyes. No strategy. Only fear. I held her gaze. Not in anger. Not in victory. In acknowledgement. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. A microphone was extended toward me. "How does it feel?" someone asked. "To see your own daughter convicted?" I paused before answering. "It feels like truth was documented," I said quietly. "And truth doesn't change because of blood." That night, alone in my house, I walked from room to room slowly. The furniture remained where it had always been. The walls unchanged. The view of the sound steady as ever. And yet, everything was different. The illusion of unconditional loyalty had been dismantled in public record. The daughter I believed I knew had been replaced by evidence, timestamps, signatures, digital logs. But something else had emerged too. Strength that was not defensive. Clarity that was not reactive. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the same kitchen table where I had once read her first school essays, where we celebrated birthdays, where we planned her college applications. Love had not disappeared, but it had boundaries now. Sentencing was 6 weeks away, and I knew that chapter would be the hardest of all. Sentencing day arrived without rain. Seattle's sky was unusually clear. Pale blue stretched over the courthouse like an indifferent witness. I woke before dawn, not because I had slept poorly, but because my body no longer allowed me to hide from decisive moments. I dressed carefully. Navy suit, low heels, the pearl earrings Thomas gave me on our 20th anniversary. Not for appearance. For grounding. I needed to feel like myself. The courthouse felt quieter than it had during trial. Fewer spectators. Fewer whispers. Consequences attract less curiosity than accusation. Claire stood when I entered. She looked thinner, her confidence stripped down to something fragile. Adrian was not beside her this time. I had learned weeks earlier that he had withdrawn from joint business filings, quietly distancing himself once the verdict became inevitable. Partnerships built on ambition rarely survive public exposure. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Claire's attorney spoke first, requesting leniency. He cited her lack of prior record, her professional achievements, her misguided attempt to assist a parent. He emphasized family reconciliation, restitution already initiated from frozen accounts, community service as an alternative to incarceration. Then Claire spoke. Her voice trembled at first, but she did not look away this time. "I convinced myself I was entitled," she said. "I told myself it was inheritance planning, that I was just accelerating what would eventually happen. I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought of it as reallocating." There was honesty in that sentence. Painful, exposed honesty. "I was wrong," she continued. "I betrayed trust. I rationalized it. I'm sorry." She turned toward me. "I'm sorry, Mom." The courtroom remained silent. The judge adjusted her glasses and began speaking slowly, deliberately. "Financial exploitation within families is among the most insidious crimes this court sees," she said. "It hides behind language like assistance and protection. It relies on access and assumption. In this case, the actions were not impulsive. They were structured, incremental, and deceptive." She referenced the hospital signing, the expired notary, the trust misrepresentation. Each fact laid out like steps descending toward inevitability. "Exploiting a parent during medical vulnerability crosses a line that demands accountability," she concluded. The sentence, 18 months incarceration, suspended after 12 with mandatory restitution, 5 years probation, permanent financial crime record, prohibition from holding fiduciary authority over any adult without court approval. Claire's breath hitched. She nodded faintly, as though bracing herself. The gavel struck once. It sounded final. As officers approached, Claire looked at me again. There was no anger left in her expression, only something raw and uncertain. I did not stand. I did not rush forward. I remained seated and held her gaze until she was led away. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked predictable questions. Do you feel justice was served? Do you regret involving the authorities? I answered calmly. Accountability is not revenge, I said. It is structure. Without structure, trust collapses. Then I walked to my car alone. The drive home felt different from the drive months earlier when this began. That day, I drove in shock. Today, I drove in clarity. When I entered my house, the quiet greeted me like an old friend. Nothing had been taken from these rooms. The house remained mine legally, structurally, undeniably. But more than that, it felt anchored in a way it hadn't before. For weeks after sentencing, I allowed myself to grieve. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. I grieved the daughter who once fell asleep on my shoulder during long car rides, the teenager who asked me to proofread college essays, the young woman whose ambition once made me proud. I had not raised her to deceive, but I had raised her without enough boundaries. That realization was heavier than the verdict. The first restitution payment arrived 3 months later. A modest sum compared to what had been taken, but symbolic. It represented acknowledgement enforced by law. I deposited it without ceremony. Then something unexpected happened. A former colleague from my compliance days called. She had heard about the case through professional circles. Not gossip, cautionary discussion. You should speak about this, she said. People don't realize how easily access turns into exploitation. At first, I resisted. I had no interest in publicity. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood something important. Silence protects patterns. I began volunteering at a senior resource center near Green Lake. Initially, I simply reviewed documents for people who felt overwhelmed, powers of attorney, trust amendments, joint account forms. I explained the difference between access and ownership, between assistance and authority. Word spread quietly. Soon I was invited to speak at community centers, then at regional banking seminars. I shared my experience not as a victim but as a case study in structural oversight. I explained how incremental transfers avoid detection, how outdated notary seals can be exploited, how hospitalization creates vulnerability windows. I watched faces in those rooms change as realization set in. One woman approached me after a workshop, tears in her eyes. My son keeps insisting on managing my accounts, she said. I thought I was being ungrateful for hesitating. You're being prudent, I told her. Pain, when documented, becomes instruction. Claire wrote to me from prison 6 months into her sentence. The letter was handwritten, slower, less polished than her usual emails. I've had time to think, she wrote. Not about the money, about the entitlement. I never questioned the assumption that what was yours would eventually be mine. I treated you like a timeline instead of a person. That sentence lingered with me. A timeline instead of a person. I did not respond immediately. Forgiveness is not denial. It is process. Eventually, I wrote back. I hope this experience teaches you the difference between love and access, I said. Our correspondence remains measured, cautious,
Real.
Adrian never contacted me again. His company dissolved within months of the trial. Investors do not tolerate reputational risk attached to fraud allegations. Life, however, did not remain frozen in that courtroom moment. I returned to the bookstore cafe where this began. I sat near the same shelf, ordered the same tea, and watched rain trace familiar paths across the window. The difference was internal. I no longer assumed proximity guaranteed loyalty. I no longer equated silence with peace. And I no longer confused protection with surrender. There are 5 lessons I carry forward now. First, love without boundaries invites entitlement. Second, documentation protects more reliably than trust alone. Third, vulnerability is a circumstance, not a permanent identity. Fourth, accountability may fracture relationships, but it restores balance. Fifth, protecting yourself is not betrayal. It is responsibility. Claire will be released in less than a year. What our relationship will look like after that, I do not yet know. Reconciliation is possible, but it will not be built on access. It will be built on transparency. I still wake early. I still review my accounts every Sunday morning, not because I am afraid, but because clarity is a habit worth keeping. The city outside my window continues as it always has, ferries crossing the Sound, traffic humming along I-5, rain arriving and leaving without apology. My story did not end in that courtroom. It shifted, and I am still here.